Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into a dusty, sun-baked corner of history where the clash of empires feels almost like a slow-motion movie, except everyone's armed with spears, muskets, and an obsession with afternoon tea. You find yourself standing on the edge of the vast South African veldt, the kind of place where the air shimmers with heat and the ground seems to whisper stories if you listen closely enough. Imagine the sun hanging low, painting everything gold, while the distant drums of the Zulu kingdom echo, waiting to ripple through time and space. You might think this sounds like an epic action scene, but believe me, the real story is a bit more complicated, and you definitely wouldn't survive a day without air conditioning or sunscreen made from crocodile poop. Yes, that's a thing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking now, or maybe just imagining it, through a landscape ruled by the Zulu people, powerful, proud, and growing, under the leadership of a king who had already started carving out a kingdom that would shake the region. The Zulu weren't just any tribe. They were a rising force in southern Africa in the early 19th century, transforming from a relatively small group into a formidable military and political power. This rise coincided with the expanding British Empire's desire to secure its hold over South Africa, a land rich in resources and strategic value. But here's where things get juicy. Despite the British thinking themselves superior, they had very little real understanding of the Zulu social structures or their fighting techniques. The two worlds were about to collide, but not before a lot of confusion. And yes, some classic British tea breaks. You might expect a straightforward story of colonial conquest, but history is rarely so neat. The British, fresh from victories elsewhere, assumed their muskets and discipline would quickly overpower what they saw as primitive warriors. Meanwhile, the Zulu, led by the memories of their legendary King Shaka, were reorganizing and modernizing their forces with incredible precision. They weren't just waving spears around, they were executing sophisticated strategies honed through decades of conflict with neighboring groups. Some historians still debate how much the British underestimated the Zulu, but it's safe to say it was a lot. And trust me, the British confusion wasn't just on the battlefield. It extended to diplomatic talks, cultural misunderstandings, and even how they approached local politics. By the time tensions reached a boiling point, the British had sent troops, and the Zulu kingdom was ready to defend its sovereignty fiercely. But before the first shots were fired, you'd be surprised at how much tea was involved in those dusty negotiations. Seriously, tea was the unofficial beverage of the British officer class, and even amidst threats of war, cups kept clinking. The British obsession with routine, even in the face of conflict, adds a strangely charming layer to this story. It's like preparing for a storm by making sure the teapot is full, somehow calming yet wildly ineffective. So as you settle deeper into this story, remember you're about to trace the footsteps of soldiers and warriors, diplomats and civilians, all tangled up in a complex web of power, pride and cultural clashes. And don't worry if you get lost in the mix. The Zulu Wars are a fascinating maze, full of surprises, and yes, spears, lots of spears, ready to follow. You step right into the heartbeat of the Zulu kingdom, where the legacy of one man still pulses through every movement. Shaka Zulu. If you thought history was all about dusty scrolls and boring dates, think again. This guy reinvented warfare in southern Africa, like a tech genius reinventing smartphones. Shaka didn't just lead, he revolutionized how battles were fought, turning his warriors into a precision machine of speed, discipline, and ferocity. His most famous innovation? The Iklewa spear, a shorter, sturdier weapon designed for close combat, perfect for stabbing rather than throwing. Imagine trading in your classic javelin for a switchblade. Suddenly, you're in someone's face, not just aiming from afar. That shift changed everything about how the Zulu engaged enemies, making them shock troops capable of overwhelming even better armed foes. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the Zulu impis, those famous regiments, move. In tight formations across the veldt, spears glinting under the sun. Shaka's military genius didn't stop with weapons. He introduced rigorous training, disciplined formations like the famous bullhorn tactic, and a warrior culture that demanded loyalty and bravery. You might picture a wild, chaotic melee, but actually, the Zulu army under Shaka was remarkably organized. Think of it like an elite sports team, every player knowing their role, timing their moves, and striking with deadly precision. This wasn't just tribal fighting. It was a sophisticated system that dominated southern Africa for decades. Here's a fun fact you probably didn't hear in school. Shaka reportedly enforced harsh punishments, not just for cowardice in battle, but also for failing to maintain cleanliness and discipline in camp. So yes, these warriors were tough and tidy. It's like boot camp met strict housekeeping standards. The Zulu camps had to be spotless because chaos was the enemy, just like the British officers obsessed with their neat little tea sets. And speaking of spears, historians are still debating the exact origins of the Isandlwana. Some argue it was a radical invention unique to Shaka, while others suggest it evolved gradually from older weapons used by Nguni peoples. Either way, its impact was undeniable. The British soldiers who faced these spears later described the brutal close-quarters combat with a mix of awe and horror. Imagine expecting a long-range musket duel and instead getting dragged into intense, sweaty knife fights. It must have felt like going to a fancy cocktail party and suddenly being handed a wrestling match. Beyond weaponry, Shaka's leadership style was legendary for combining fear and respect. He inspired his people not just by sheer force, but through careful rituals and a vision of a united Zulu nation. This tight-knit identity fueled their fierce resistance against colonial powers, making the Zulu more than just a military threat. They were a cultural powerhouse standing tall amid the storm of imperial expansion. So, as you listen, picture the Zulu impis preparing for battle. The sharp click of sandals on dirt, warriors chanting in unison, the steady tightening of spear grips. They weren't just fighting for land. They were defending a way of life shaped by innovation, pride, and a few rules about camp cleanliness. If only the British had realized sooner that they weren't just facing spears, they were facing a whole new kind of war. And as you settle in tonight, remember that the shadow of Shaka's spear would stretch long over the battles to come, ready to see how the British tried and failed to make sense of all this. You're still walking alongside the dusty trails of southern Africa, but now your view shifts to the other side. The British Empire, armed with red coats, stiff upper lips, and an almost comical faith in their own sense of order. The Brits, fresh off expanding their colonial reach across the globe, had their eyes on the fertile lands and strategic ports of the region. They saw South Africa as a jewel in the imperial crown, a gateway to riches, and a key stop on the route to India. But here's the twist. Their understanding of the Zulu people and local politics was patchy at best, kind of like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts. You can almost picture a British officer, polished boots gleaming under the harsh sun, adjusting his hat and wondering why local chiefs seemed so inscrutable. The British diplomatic corps tried to negotiate with the Zulu and neighboring tribes, but cultural misunderstandings quickly piled up like a leaning tower of bureaucratic blunders. They assumed that treaties meant exactly what British law said, forgetting that oral agreements and traditional customs played a huge role in African politics. One official might have thought signing a paper meant peace forever, while the Zulu saw it as a flexible arrangement subject to renegotiation after a good feast. Here's a quirky detail. The British often insisted on holding formal tea ceremonies, even in the middle of tense talks. Imagine negotiating your country's fate over delicate cups of Earl Grey, while outside warriors sharpen spears and prepare for battle. This ritualized politeness created an odd juxtaposition between formality and imminent violence, a sort of surreal British version of keep calm and carry on, drinking tea. The British military, confident in their muskets and artillery, viewed the Zulu as natives who could be subdued with a show of firepower and discipline. But as it turned out, their overconfidence was a dangerous blind spot. Early intelligence underestimated the speed, cohesion, and tactical savvy of the Zulu impis. British commanders sent messages back home boasting of an easy campaign, only to be proven wrong again and again. Some historians still debate whether this was simple arrogance or a fundamental misreading of the Zulu as equals rather than enemies. Meanwhile, internal British politics complicated matters further. Colonial officials disagreed over how aggressively to push into Zulu lands, with some advocating diplomacy and others itching for outright conquest. This indecision meant that when conflict finally broke out, the British were not fully prepared, both in terms of strategy and supply lines. By the time the first real clash arrived, the British had managed to alienate some local tribes, create confusion with conflicting orders, and generally bumble their way into a conflict that could have been avoided, or at least better planned. So you can imagine the tension in those early days. Redcoats marching with stiff backs and stiff drinks, trying to impose order on a land that had its own rhythm and rules. And just to add a little spice to the mix, the British often relied on inaccurate maps and conflicting reports. It's as if they tried navigating the African wilderness with a London tube map. This geographic confusion played a role in some of their biggest early defeats, proving that even the mightiest empire can stumble if it underestimates local knowledge. So, as you settle in, you can almost hear the clash of two worlds, one confident, rigid, and wrapped in tradition, the other fluid, fierce, and deeply rooted in its own customs. The stage is set, the players are ready, and the British are about to find out that the Zulu spear isn't just a relic, it's a symbol of a resistance they didn't quite expect. And yes, the teacups are still quietly clinking somewhere nearby. Ready for the battle that shocked the empire. Now picture the morning of January 22nd, 1879, dust swirling in the dry air, the sun still low but already fierce enough to sting your skin if you linger too long without shade or sunscreen. You're standing somewhere near Isandlwana Hill, a place that would soon echo with the chaos of a battle so unexpected that it sent shockwaves through the British Empire. The British troops, confident but stretched thin, are setting up camp, rifles polished and red coats pressed, while the Zulu impis silently gather in the tall grass beyond the ridge. You can almost feel the eerie calm, like the moment just before a thunderstorm breaks, only this storm was about to rewrite history. The Battle of Isandlwana wasn't just a fight, it was a stunning defeat for the British. The Zulu army, using their bullhorn formation perfected under Shaka's legacy, encircled and overwhelmed the British forces. The British had superior firepower on paper, but they underestimated the Zulus' tactical brilliance and sheer numbers. Around 20,000 warriors against fewer than 1,800 soldiers. Imagine expecting a chess game, but getting a full-on rugby scrum instead. The British lines collapsed quickly under the pressure of close-quarter combat, where the Ikelwa spear and fierce Zulu charges turned the battlefield into a chaotic melee. Here's a lesser-known twist. The British had actually positioned their camp in a way that left them vulnerable, without proper fortifications or defensive earthworks. The reasons for this vary in historical debates, with some blaming poor leadership, others pointing to complacency born of previous colonial victories. Whatever the cause, this oversight proved catastrophic. Soldiers who were supposed to be guarding supply wagons were instead scattered, and by the time they tried to regroup, the Zulu were already swarming the camp. You might find it surprising that even with their advanced rifles and artillery, the British struggled to reload and maintain effective fire under the Zulu onslaught. The warriors' speed and ferocity made it nearly impossible to form the disciplined firing lines the British relied on. Some survivors described the battle as a nightmare of noise, dust, and fear, where friend and foe seemed indistinguishable amid the chaos. It's the kind of defeat that historians still puzzle over, how a technologically superior force could be so thoroughly beaten. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the human element. Among the carnage, many British soldiers fought bravely, and the Zulu warriors displayed extraordinary coordination and endurance. It wasn't just a massacre, it was a clash of wills and strategies, where both sides showed courage and skill. And while the British command scrambled to send reinforcements, The news of Isandlwana's fall sent a ripple of disbelief across the empire. Imagine a royal court used to hearing of colonial victories, instead receiving the headline, "British Army routed by spear-wielding warriors." Talk about a PR nightmare. What really makes Isandlwana fascinating is how it challenges the old narrative of colonial superiority. Here, the Zulu forces proved that indigenous armies could not only resist, but decisively defeat European troops. Yet, this battle was only the beginning of a longer, more complicated war, full of heroism, tragedy, and yes, plenty of confusion on both sides. So as you imagine the dust settling over that battlefield, remember, history is not always tidy. Sometimes it's a messy, brutal scramble where the expected winner stumbles. And if you thought the British would immediately bounce back, well, hold on. The story gets even more interesting at Rorke's Drift, where a tiny outpost turned into a legend all on its own. Ready to follow? The dust hasn't quite settled from Isandlwana, and now you're trekking toward a small mission station called Rorke's Drift, perched on the edge of the Buffalo River. Here, a handful of British soldiers, just over 150, prepared to face an onslaught from thousands of Zulu warriors. It sounds like the setup for a hopeless last stand, and honestly, it kind of was. But it's also one of those moments in history that became legendary, partly because of the bravery shown, and partly because the British press turned it into a mythic tale of survival against all odds. Picture this. You're inside a makeshift fortress cobbled together with mealie bags, wagons, and anything else that could provide cover. Outside, the steady thrum of Zulu war chants grows louder as hundreds of impis surround the station. The soldiers are exhausted, rattled from the disaster at Isandlwana, yet they brace themselves for what feels like certain doom. But here's the kicker. The defenders managed to hold the line for over 12 hours, repelling wave after wave of attacks with a mix of rifle fire, clever defense, and raw determination. It's like watching a scrappy underdog refuse to quit in the final round of a boxing match. The story of Rorke's Drift became so famous that 11 Victoria Crosses, Britain's highest military honor, were awarded for that single battle. That's a record that still stands, and it's a reminder of how the British narrative quickly pivoted from defeat to heroism. But here's a detail you might not know. Many historians argue that the Zulu assault at Rorke's Drift was not a coordinated attempt to annihilate the outpost, but rather a diversion to cover the main army's movements. So the famous last stand might owe as much to circumstance as to strategy. You can almost hear the eerie contrast as British soldiers sipped the last of their tea inside the fort, their nerves stretched tight, but their routine oddly intact. That British stubbornness, keeping calm and carrying on with the rituals of daily life even as chaos loomed, is both admirable and, well, a bit absurd. The Zulu, on the other hand, fought with a ferocity born of defending their homeland, using the terrain and their intimate knowledge of the battlefield to great effect. If the Zulu army was a finely tuned orchestra at Isandlwana, here they were the relentless drummers pounding on the gate. Some scholars still debate whether the victory at Rorke's Drift was a true turning point or simply a well-publicized episode in a larger, grimmer war. It's a reminder that history often wears different masks depending on who tells the story. Meanwhile, the soldiers who survived carried scars, both physical and mental, that would linger long after the guns fell. Silent. And for those listening now, it's easy to get swept up in the drama, but harder to grasp the deep human cost behind the headlines. So, as you settle further into this tale, imagine the weight of that long night, the crackle of gunfire, the shadows, dancing on the walls, and the quiet moments between when everyone wondered if dawn would come. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. And somewhere nearby, the ever-present kettle probably hissed on a campfire, a small but stubborn reminder of British habits no war could erase, ready to see how the British tried to regroup, fueled by tea and stubborn pride. The echo of gunfire and battle cries still lingers in the air as the British, battered but not beaten, begin to regroup and rethink their strategy. Imagine a scene not unlike a frazzled office after a big disaster, papers everywhere, frantic, phone calls and someone desperately insisting on making tea to calm the nerves. Because yes, tea remained the lifeblood of the British officers, even in the middle of a war zone. It's almost funny to picture this. Amidst supply shortages, muddy trenches and looming enemy attacks, you'd still find someone carefully steeping a pot of tea like a soothing ritual against the chaos. Logistics became the real battlefield now. The British had to move troops, weapons and supplies across harsh terrain without reliable roads or maps that made sense. They improvised, relying on ox wagons, makeshift hospitals, and a network of missionaries and settlers who doubled as scouts and informants. It was a slow, grinding effort, and you can almost hear the frustrated sighs as commanders debated the best way to face an enemy who knew the land better than anyone else. Interestingly, tea wasn't just a morale booster, it became a symbol of British resilience and identity during this campaign. Officers often planned their days around tea times, turning brief moments of calm into almost sacred breaks. Some accounts even suggest that offering tea to local allies was a diplomatic gesture, a way to build rapport through a shared, if very British, ritual. So, even while musket balls flew, teacups clinked, a bizarre, almost absurd soundtrack to war. Meanwhile, the Zulu were adapting too. They observed the British regrouping and started adjusting their tactics, blending traditional combat with guerrilla-style raids that kept their enemies on edge. The war wasn't a simple clash of civilizations. It became a protracted, exhausting struggle where both sides learned from each other, sometimes painfully. One detail that historians find fascinating is how the British medical services struggled to keep up with the wounded. The makeshift hospitals were often overwhelmed, and diseases like malaria and dysentery proved as deadly as any spear. The irony isn't lost that while soldiers risked their lives in battle, many succumbed to illnesses that a proper supply chain might have prevented. It's a stark reminder that war isn't just about bullets and bravery, it's about survival, in every sense. So as you lean back, maybe with a cup of tea yourself, picture the British command tents buzzing with tension and exhaustion, but also determination. The war had revealed their vulnerabilities, but also sparked a fierce resolve to not let the Zulu challenge go unanswered. The impy spears were still out there, but so was British stubbornness, and maybe that pot of tea was just what kept it all from unraveling. Next, we'll walk into the final clashes and witness the slow but inevitable fall of the Zulu kingdom. Ready? The months roll on, and the war grinds forward with an uneasy rhythm, like a slow march to a finale neither side truly wants, but both feel compelled to face. The British, reinforced and better supplied, press deeper into Zulu land, determined to break the power of the impis once and for all. But the Zulu, though battered, refused to back down, their warriors still charging with that same fierce pride and unyielding spirit. Imagine the landscape dotted with tents and battle scars, the air thick with dust, sweat, and the lingering scent of gunpowder mingling with wildflowers. It's a scene that feels both ancient and achingly human, full of hopes and heartbreaks, tangled together. By now the British have abandoned the idea that sheer firepower alone will win the war. They adapt, learning to respect the Zulus' tactics and using scouts and local guides to navigate the treacherous terrain. There's a grudging admiration among some officers, though it's wrapped in the usual colonial mix of superiority and misunderstanding. One officer reportedly said that fighting the Zulu was like trying to catch a shadow with a net, a nod to their elusive, relentless nature. One interesting, lesser-known fact is that the British forces began using mounted troops more extensively during these later stages, which was quite a shift from their earlier reliance on foot soldiers and slow-moving wagons. Horses gave them a mobility advantage that helped counter the Zulu's speed and surprise attacks. It's a bit like upgrading from dial-up internet to broadband. Suddenly, things move faster, and you can keep up better, but the connection is still tricky. As the war draws toward its climax, you can almost hear the weary conversations in British camps, officers debating strategies over the flicker of lanterns, soldiers sharing stories of narrow escapes, and medics quietly tallying the cost. The Zulu side too feels the strain. King Cetshwayo, Shaka's successor, watches as his kingdom faces an unstoppable force that combines modern technology with imperial ambition. Yet even in defeat, the Zulu fight on with a resilience that commands respect. Historians still debate the exact reasons for the Zulus' eventual fall. Was it simply the overwhelming numbers and resources of the British, the fragmentation of Zulu unity under pressure, or the devastating impact of new weapons and tactics? The truth is probably a mix of all these, tangled in the complex web of empire identity and survival. As you listen now, imagine the quiet moments between battles, the soft murmur of the veldt at night, the crackling of campfires, the distant call of nightbirds. The war is not just about violence, but about endurance, about the slow grinding toll on bodies and spirits. And as the British advance, the Zulu kingdom's proud story moves toward a bittersweet end. Coming up next is the final act, the fall of the Zulu kingdom and the aftermath that shaped South Africa's future. Ready to step into that moment? The final act unfolds like a slow fade from light to shadow. The British, now better organized and reinforced, close in on the heart of Zululand. You're there, feeling the tension in the air thick as the dust kicked up by marching boots. The Zulu kingdom, once a vibrant force of culture and resistance, is on the brink of collapse. It's a moment both tragic and strangely quiet, like the last page of a long, intense novel where the characters take a deep breath before the end. The decisive Battle of Ulundi in July 1879 marks the collapse. Unlike Isandlwana's chaos, this fight is a calculated, overwhelming show of force. The British form disciplined squares, their artillery pounding the Zulu lines. The Impis, brave as ever, charge with fierce cries, but the firepower is too much. It's like watching a raging storm meet an unyielding dam. The flood pushes hard, but the barrier holds. When the dust settles, the Zulus suffer a crushing defeat, and King Cetshwayo is captured, signaling the end of an independent Zulu state. Yet there's a softer side to this brutal finale. The British, despite their victory, struggled to govern the land. They imposed new leaders, divided territories, and tried to rewrite centuries of tradition with colonial laws. The aftermath wasn't neat or peaceful. It was a messy, drawn-out process of cultural upheaval and resistance. You can almost hear the whispers of the people who lived through it, caught between old ways and a new, uncertain future. Here's a detail that often slips under the radar. The British didn't immediately annex Zululand outright. Instead, they attempted to use indirect rule, which meant installing friendly chiefs and hoping to control the region through them. This approach created tensions and power struggles that simmered for decades, influencing South Africa's complex history long after the last musket fire faded. And as you listen now, the story gently slows down. The clash of spears and muskets fades into the background, replaced by the quiet resilience of a people rebuilding. The land remembers both glory and loss, a testament to endurance more than conquest. You might imagine the soft rustling of grass, in the breeze the faint hum of insects, and the slow, steady heartbeat of a land that keeps on turning. So as you prepare to drift off, take comfort in this. History isn't just about battles won or lost. It's about stories, people, and the echoes they leave behind. And tonight, you've walked through a chapter filled with courage, confusion, tea, and spears. Now dim the lights even lower, let your breath slow, and let the soft rhythm of the past lull you gently into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.